Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. We have another live stream from American Coin and Currency. Today's title is Sunken Riches and Forgotten Legends, the story of Maravillas Shipwreck. Today we have John Mady, CEO, founder of American Coin and Currency. We have Richard Seitz, a deep sea diver, historian, as well as a retired shipwreck explorer. Yeah, we're excited to have you guys today. Um, give you guys a little intro here. So, if you guys don't know John Mady, founder of American Coin Currency, if you want to give a little bit of a background of who you are and let our audiences know what's going on.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining, everyone. Really excited about today's show. We're going to be exploring some fascinating historical, not only facts but situations. Again, my name is John Mady. I'm the owner and founder of American Coin and Currency. We deal in all kinds of valuable coins, rare coins, from shipwreck coins, all the way to current mint releases and everything in between, as well as currency, rare notes, and other high-end collectibles. And we're happy to be part of this show today. It's going to be very exciting. It's something near and dear to my heart. Living down here on the Treasure Coast, as it's known. That's the stretch of beach from roughly Melbourne to Jupiter, where I live. So Richard is with us today, and he'll have a fascinating story, I'm sure, to tell.
Thank you, John.
You're
Well,
welcome.
I'm a fifth generation South Floridian. My great grandfather was born in the Bahamas in 1801, moved to Key West probably in the 1820s or 1830s. And then his son Samuel moved up to Key Largo about 1870 and homesteaded 143 acres on the ocean just north of East Tavernier. It was a little fishing and a farming community called Planner. And when the railroad came, as well as hurricanes and pineapple blights, Planner dissolved and became Tavernier, and my family moved up to Miami in 1911. So my dad was born in Miami in 1922, went to school barefoot, and they lived real close to the bay. Of course, in those days, everybody lived close to the bay. And he grew up along the waterfront and everything. And eventually, just to shorten the story a little bit, he went in 1962. He went to work for what was called the Conservation Patrol. And that later morphed into what is today the FWC. They incorporated Florida Freshwater Fish and Game Commission and so on. He also worked to help eradicate alligator poaching in the Everglades in the 70s. And then he designed Biscayne National Park for the National Park Service. So I spent all of my youth boating on South Biscayne Bay and hanging around on the Keys and boats and so on. So that's how I end up here. 5 generations in South Florida.
That's really very rare. I don't hear that story from too many people, especially nowadays. 5 generations down here. I know one other person whose family's been here for 4, and that's pretty extraordinary. But that is you are a Floridian through and through, Richard.
Well, and the way I got tied into the Maravilla was my dad. When I was a kid growing up, we had our own hookah rig diving systems. A hookah rig is a compressor that stays shipboard and pumps air down to divers on the bottom. Unlike tanks, you can stay down for extended periods of time. And we had an airlift, which is the way an airlift works is it's a tube, usually of aluminum, with a fitting on the bottom, and air is injected into the bottom. And as it rises and expands, it creates suction. So you really have like a small vacuum cleaner that you can vacuum vacuum sand off of artifacts. So we worked on the 1733 fleet sank in the upper Keys and up as far as Elliott Key. And so in the late 60s and 70s, we spent a lot of weekends out there doing, working around on those wrecks. And the way I ended up, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was just about to ask you. So how did you get into you're about to say it?
Well, when my dad was stationed in the Everglades, he was the go-to guy when the Washington appropriations people needed to come down and have a good time. My dad was the go-to guy for fun in the Glades. And during one of those trips, there was a guy from Oklahoma named Vernon Barge who had so much fun. He said, well, you ought to meet my partner, Jack Kelly. And Jack had been extremely successful as an architect and a construction guy. He built 18 of the tallest buildings in America, each the tallest one in the city. He built the Landmark Bank building in Fort Lauderdale. So he and my dad hit it off really well. Well, Jack was anxious to get into the treasure hunting game, and my dad seemed like the perfect person to put the two together. So for a couple of summers, we traveled down through the lower Bahamas and the Turks and the Caicos. We'd get a boat or ship and go down there and do that. And then the opportunity to work on the Maravilla came up, and Jack was the perfect person to put those pieces together. And the way it worked was, before we talk about the shipwreck, let me just tell you about how we ended up there. Probably the best worldwide authority on shipwrecks was Bob Marks, who was later knighted by England and known as Sir Robert Marks, obviously. And all shipwreck hunting needs a constant injection of funds. In fact, I think that one of Mel Fisher's greatest attributes was the ability to continue to raise investor dollars over the 16 years that he hunted for the Atocha down off Key West. Because once the treasure comes up, it's divided and sold, and then you need fresh money to keep the thing going again. Well, Jack had plenty of money, but he didn't have access to a wreck. And Bob Marks was the big authority. He needed money. So to finance his treasure hunting, Bob had teamed up with Willard Bascom, a scientist, an engineer. He worked on the famous Mohole project, where they attempted to drill down through the Earth's crust. Excuse me, drill down through the Earth's crust into the mantle. So he was pretty well. He was a scientist and adventurer and so on. So the two of them got together, and Marks had the shipwreck expertise, and Bascom had the money. And they began searching for the Maravilla in 1972.
Wow. Okay.
So that's
wow.
The Maravilla. Now we can talk about the shipwreck itself and how it ended up there, because the story of how the Maravilla ended up on the bottom is pretty interesting.
I did have one question real quick, Richard. Before these two gentlemen got together, when exactly was the shipwreck, or roughly when was the shipwreck discovered, and how did the Sir Marks, how did he get the rights to salvage that? Obviously, he did at some point from the Bohemian government, but when was it originally discovered? And was he the one who discovered it?
One that discovered it in 1972, and the way that it was discovered. Bob was one of the few people who could read ancient Spanish. And he used to go to the Spanish archives in Seville and research different things. And that's where he found out about the Maravilla. Now, what made him famous was he had been contracted by the Jamaican authorities to salvage the sunken city of Port Royal. Port Royal was on the harbor in Jamaica, and I think it was an earthquake. The whole town slid right down the mountain into the harbor basin. And
Wow.
Bob became famous as the person that led the salvage expedition that salvaged the city of Port Royal.
Okay.
So that probably.
And then,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, go.
So that's a fascinating. That is, I've read that somewhere a while back, and I didn't know if it was true, but obviously it is that the whole city actually sank into the town sank into the sea. That's fascinating. Just slid in. How did the ship? What caused the shipwreck of the Maravillas?
Well, and this is very fascinating. Typically, shipwrecks were caused by hurricanes because they didn't have barometers. The barometer was invented in, I think, 1643. So it was not in widespread use when the Maravilla went down, but like the Atocha sank in 1622 after only 2 days at sea. So without it lacking a barometer, if you've lived in Florida and you know what the approach of a hurricane, it can be a beautiful, sunny, warm day, and the next day the hurricane is upon you. That can happen. And the Atocha left Havana on September 4th, 1622, and 2 days later it was sitting on the bottom of the ocean off Key West. The 1733 fleet was traveling up the Keys when they encountered hurricane, and they sank all along the upper Keys as far as Elliott Key. The 1715 fleet sank off, as John mentioned, off the Treasure Coast, really from like Fort Pierce up to around Melbourne, about a dozen ships, and that was again sunk by a hurricane. That was sunk on July 31st, 1750. Okay. So hurricanes were the typical source of shipwrecks. But what happened with the Maravilla was, and if I can back up just a second, John, the Spanish used to collect treasure from the Pacific, and they would bring it to Panama, and then they would by mule carry it across the isthmus to Portobello, and then the Spanish ships in Cartagena, Colombia, would stop at Portobello and pick up the treasure from the Pacific and also the silver from Bolivia and Peru, and then continue to Havana, which would be their last stop for mirth, merriment, and provisions. And also another thing that you really don't think about, these wooden ships were in constant need of repair. They had carpenters aboard, as well as the bosun, who would work on keeping the ships seaworthy. So when they got to Havana, they would often have to repair the ships before they started back to Spain. Well, one of the ships leaving Cartagena sank on the Shanghai Reef off Ecuador. And that treasure was recovered and was kept there in Cartagena. And they said, well, we've got to get this to Spain. This was in 1654. We have to get this to Spain. So they took the Maravilla, and the Maravilla had a double load of treasure on it. It had its own treasure, plus the treasure that had been recovered from the Concepcion that sank on Shanghai Reef. So it left and went to Havana and stayed there while they got provisions and so on and so forth. And then it left, and the way the ships used to go, if this was the state of Florida and this was the Bahama Bank, the Gulf Stream would flow between the two up the coast. And so ships would ride the Gulf Stream up until they were clear of the Bahama Bank, and then they would turn and go over to Europe. Well, on January 4th, 1656, the fleets had two ships, heavily armed ships, the Capitana, which would be in the front, and the Admiralty, which would be in the rear. And they were heavily laden with armament. The Maravilla had 36 bronze cannons on it. And so they were in charge of protecting the fleet. Well, as they went along in the middle of the night, the Maravilla got off course, and the way they used to measure the depth was they would have a lead weight on a rope with wax on the end. It was called a blue pigeon, and the guy up on the bow would throw the weight up ahead, and it would sink to the bottom and hit the bottom. And then when they pulled it back in, they could look at what was caught in the wax, and that would tell them what kind of a bottom they had.
Oh.
So the Maravilla is off. It's the middle of the night in January. It's cold, and the Maravilla is off course, but they don't know it yet. And the guy throws the blue pigeon and yells out. My dad used to tell me, I hope I remember it correctly, he used to say, "Once brasses," which is 11 fathoms. Well, they were supposed to be in the Gulf Stream. There's not supposed to be any fathoms. And all of a sudden, 66 feet. So they fired the cannon, signaling for the fleet to turn, because if you go back to my picture, they thought they were going clear of the Bahama Bank, and actually they were cutting it short. And so they fired the cannon and signaling for the fleet to turn westward back toward Florida. But in the confusion, the Capitana collided with the Maravilla and destroyed the hull. And the Capitana was able to survive, but the Maravilla was taking on so much water. Even they had pumps on these ships, manual pumps. And with everybody pumping, there's an account that even people were taking mattresses and clothes and things and trying to stuff holes, plug up the holes in the hull. But it was apparent that they were not going to be able to save the ship. And the way we know about this is, and this is a really fascinating piece too. There was a Spanish priest who was on the ship that sank on the Shanghai Reef, but he survived. Then he got on the Maravilla, and he was on the Maravilla when it sank, but he survived. And then he was rescued. And when they were off the coast of Spain at Cadiz, they encountered the English, and he was captured by the English and held as a prisoner for several years. But he wrote the very detailed account of what happened that night. Now, to back up just a second, how big are these ships? Well, probably the most famous shipwreck is of the period is the Atocha, and the Atocha, sank because they didn't know about hurricanes, and it was only 2 days out of Havana when it was caught in a hurricane. It sank in 55 feet of water, about 35 miles off the western end of Key West toward Dry Tortugas. But the Atocha was only about 250 tons, and it had about 250 people on it. I think only 2 or 3 survived. One of them was a slave, but everybody else on the Atocha was lost. The Maravilla was about 900 tons, so it was about 3 times the size of the Atocha, and it had 650 people on it. So, I mean, it was a great big ship. It had a huge stern castle on the back, and when it sank, 605 of the 650 people died, but the priest, many of them froze to death overnight because it was in January, and and the priest survived, hanging on to a hatch cover. And then in the morning, one of the other ships that had lost a rudder had anchored, and when light came, they sent small boats over to get whoever was left. Of course, you can imagine a ship that size, there'd be debris, a huge debris field of broken wood and sails and animals thrashing around. They just left Havana, and don't forget that these ships had to carry provisions with them for the trip across the Atlantic, which could take 5 to 6 weeks. So they would have had live animals with them, so the water could have been full of, floating carcasses and supplies and barrels and clothes and everything. So up the Maravilla is about 30 miles north of Memory Rock. If we go back to our map of the Bahamas, west end comes over here like this, and then you come up about 20 or 30 miles, and there's Memory Rock, and then 20 or 30 miles more is where the Maravilla is. Roughly, I mean, it's a very, very desolate area up there. The water is crystal clear, but it's nothing but a big white sand bank and a crystal clear blue sky. But it's about 35 feet to the bottom and about 15 feet of sand on top of the hard pan. So the Maravilla broke apart.
What's hard pan, Richard? For those that don't know.
Just after you dig down through soft dirt, you hit the hard surface of rock, and not really a coral reef. It's just underneath the sand. So the Maravilla settled onto this big sand bank, and for I think the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, of course what they did with shipwrecks in those days, if there's anything left above water, they burned it off so that it couldn't be spotted from a distance.
Oh wow!
And then for 3 or 4 or 5 years, every time there was an opportunity, the Spanish came and salvaged the Maravilla, but it continued to break apart and be scattered over miles. They call it a scatter field, and it stretches for miles depending on which way the currents and what part of the ship is left, and so on. Now, typically in a shipwreck like the Atocha, what happened down there was the ship bottom opened up and dropped everything in a pile.
Oh.
Typically, shipwrecks are spotted by locating a ballast pile. In the bottom of the ships were huge river stones, typically from Spain, because that's where the ships came from. And the ballast is in the bottom, and it helps. All sailboats have a keel or a ballast in the bottom that keeps them upright.
Yeah.
And typically they're found because the ship breaks apart in one spot, and you can find the ballast pile. But the Maravilla broke up and was scattered over years, and so no main pile has ever been really recovered. There's been a lot of gold and silver recovered and emeralds, but not a main pile like the Atocha. The Atocha. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Real quick, Richard. With this shipwreck, because I've read in different circumstances that sometimes they would take those ballast stones out and actually put silver ingots in there to stabilize the boat. I think that happened with the Atocha. I don't know if it was all silver ingots, but that's what I had read at some point. And in this case, with this shipwreck, the Maravillas, were there any large ingots found anywhere? The ones you see at the Bell Fisher Museum. I don't know the weight of them, but they're absolutely huge. I mean, they're blocks of silver.
Well, that's interesting. Those silver bars weigh about 80 pounds, and and the Atocha had 1,038 silver bars. So do the math: 1,000 times 80, and then the Atocha had copper ingots. I don't know. I've never seen a full copper ingot, but so I don't know really what they look like. So it would make perfect sense that they could replace ballast stones with a copper or silver. But I don't know the technical story on that. But anyway, to get back to the Maravilla, after several years of salvaging, and now it's in about 50 feet of water, so they had to have native divers who would use stones to go to the bottom, hold a stone and ride it to the bottom and get whatever they could and bring it back up. After a couple of years, it was just completely covered with sand. And so a couple hundred years went by before Bob Barks and Willard Bascom started searching for it in the early 70s. The first time I saw them, the first time I was up there, I remember very clearly going up in the boat, and they were in a ship called the Griffon, which was a former shrimp boat. There's some history to that boat. A friend of mine, Tom Gaitis, has told me. I think it was in Key West, and some other stuff. I don't remember all the details, but in any event, it was outfitted with what's called a mailbox. That's a prop wash deflector, a 90-degree deflector that gets lowered down and deflects the prop wash from the ship down to the bottom to blow away the sand, so that the spot can be worked. Mel Fisher invented those. They called them blowers. They called them mailboxes. So the Griffon was a shrimp boat with a big blower on the back. I think it was either 5 or 6 feet across. I mean, it was a great big one. Since the Griffon only had one prop, it only had one mailbox. So we're coming up there, and it's hard to imagine just how desolate it is way up on the bank. And here we see this little speck, and it's the Griffon looking for the Maravilla. And the way that they looked for it is a common term. They called it magging for a shipwreck, and what that means is they tow a proton magnetometer behind the ship, and it sinks down low, and it records anomalies in the ship in the Earth's magnetic field. And so every time it records an anomaly, they call it a hit. And then somebody on ship would have a buoy with a weight on it, and they'd say, okay, there's a hit. So they throw the buoy over, they come back around, and then stop while one of the divers went down to investigate. And in fact, I did some of that, and here's a picture. This is me with a olive jar that was recovered. That's me at 22, sitting on the deck of the Griffon holding an olive jar when I went down to investigate one of the hits. This is what I found. Now, olive jars were earthen vessels used to carry supplies. And in fact, I brought a piece. This is a piece of one of those olive jars.
Wow. Nice.
This one was part of a bunch of debris that was recovered by Marex expeditions in the 80s. Herbo Humphreys led those expeditions, and that's where this came from.
What year was that? The picture, Richard, what year was that?
74.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So let me just bring us up to speed. So the ships ran into each other, causing catastrophic damage to the Maravillas. It sank on the Bahama Bank, miles and miles away from nearest land, is what I'm understanding. And in about 55 to 60 feet of water. And so at some point, through a series of just how life works, you now find yourself on the Bahamas bank, gearing up, going down, checking out hits, anomalies, and then I'm eventually, because you have, here's another picture of Richard that I have holding a gold piece.
Oh, yeah.
Let me see. Oh, my camera's following me. Sorry. There you are, holding that gold piece.
Yep.
Nice.
What is that piece?
Well,
that's
ornate belt.
Okay.
To get back to the story for just a second, what I was saying was they drag a magnetometer back and forth, and every time there was a hit, they'd throw a buoy, and somebody'd have to go see what it was before they, iron or a cannon or anchor or debris or something like that. So we came up on Bob Marks and the group, and they were bagging just endlessly. They had a big chart out, and they just went up and down all day, every day. I mean, it's really a thankless, tedious job to try and locate a shipwreck in a spot like this. Of course, Mel Fisher did the exact same thing to find the Atocha. It took him 16 years down there of that constant magging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Stop, dig a hole, look and see what it was. If it's nothing, pull up the blower and start all over again. So after Marx had found the Maravilla, and I'm not sure what they actually discovered, the Bahama government had just been taken over from not really freed. What's the word? They got their independence from Britain.
Yeah.
And, Bob Marks had the least working, but he said some unflattering things about the new Bahamian government. And they said, well, tell you what, how about if you never come back here and work in the Bahamas again? So in steps the guy that I had mentioned earlier to you, Jack Kelly, and he probably made that connection through my dad because my dad knew everybody. He knew Mel Fisher, Pat Klein, Kip Wagner, everybody. And so Jack was not only a very, very accomplished businessman, but a very, very smart and smooth talking guy. And I don't mean that in a bad way at all. I mean, just the kind of guy that could make deals happen. So he stepped in and they said, well, as long as Marx doesn't come here, you continue to work. So that's how Jack got involved. And then Jack turned to my dad and said, let's put together a crew. So Marx had a couple of guys, Mike Daniel and Dick Anderson. And my dad got a couple of guys, me and my dad and a cousin of ours, Glenn. So the five of us were the crew. And then the captain was a guy from New England. I mean, a classic New England ship captain. I mean, a really, really crusty guy. And so the six of us out there on the Griffon, and Dick Anderson was the operation dive master. And he's a very interesting guy. He had one of the first scuba licenses in California and made quite a reputation. He's actually most famous because he used to go up in the American River and pan for gold in the river with scuba equipment. And most panning for gold is done with a sledge, and they bring it up, they pump it up, and all this. Well, he was working with an airlift, just like I was describing to you earlier, in the river, laying in the river bottom, working for looking for gold nuggets. The National Geographic picture he had recovered. Now this is 50 years ago. I don't know if it may be out of date now, but he had recovered the largest single gold nugget ever recovered. I mean, it was huge. I don't remember the exact details, and I don't want to overstate it. But he was a very, very well-known adventurer, treasure hunter, and he came to the shipwreck wearing an Aussie hat, and he came with a Hasselblad camera. You probably never even seen a Hasselblad camera, but in fact, but that's
they're expensive. They're not cheap. I'm familiar with them. They are the best cameras. So that's fascinating. Some people just have that they have that luck, right, where they just find things, and that's pretty amazing. So Richard, you guys you're on the Griffon, and then you continue to track. You eventually you start salvaging the wreck, the Maravillas. Can you go into a little bit? You told us how many people were on deck or on the crew, but when you're gearing up, and then that day that you went in the water, your first time, and I'm a diver, so I'm speaking from experience, but not the experience of finding anything. But you're under the water, 100-foot visibility, and all of a sudden you see something glimmering in the sunlight, and that's gold and something of high value, treasure. Can you kind of tell us and our listeners what's going through your mind, what you're feeling, the exhilaration, all of that? That would be really great if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because in most recovery efforts, there's a transition period between having nothing and having a lot. And what I mean by that is you find nails and belt buckles and pottery and all of that, and it leads up to one coin and then a few coins. We got there. There wasn't much of that stuff. There wasn't a much debris. What there was all the heavy metal that had sat on the bottom. Everything else had been washed away. So the first thing we start doing, we found silver coins were just everywhere, and
Wow.
all over the bottom. And then a lot of gold was recovered, coins, belts, chains, stuff like that. Again, it's been 50 years. I don't know where all that stuff went. I wasn't involved in the division with the Bahamian government, but what I was trying to suggest to you is we went from being topside to gold coins. So it's like it's like being time boom, and all of a sudden it's there. But what does happen is there is a real thing called gold fever, and so we used to have gold fondling sessions at the dinner table. Captain Charlie, the cook, and so we would have to have gold fondling sessions, and there's no way people can describe it to you until you actually hold 300-year-old 24 karat gold, in your hands, and know that it hasn't been on the surface for 320 years or something like that. It's really, but then the opposite happens. After a while, there's just so much of it. After a while, you kind of get jaded. And a funny story is, I'm shade color blind, and green is my worst color. But my dad, very, very acute color vision, and green was his best color. So we found coffee cans full of emeralds, these are very famous. They're called miso emeralds, and from the miso mine. And if I can just digress for just a second,
of course.
the way that if you can picture this, the prop wash is being deflected down to the bottom like this, and when it hits the bottom, it makes like an inverted mushroom. So there's a strong current like this right to the bottom. Well, once the sand was blown away, we were working in the bottom of a big, what looked like a doodle bug hole, a big cone. But now the hard pan was exposed, and that's where the treasure and the emeralds and all that stuff would be. But there was no way to stay on the bottom because of the prop blast. So we had gaff hooks that had rubber bands. The tubing that goes on spearfishing equipment, and we would hook them on our belt, and we would ride the current, the prop wash, down to the bottom. And as soon as we hit the bottom, we would hook in with the gaff into the hard pan, because it would immediately be trying to just blow you away. And all the work that we did, we were hooked into the bottom. I think. Wow. I've never seen that mentioned in the Atocha. I think they blew the holes at the Atocha and then turned the blower off. But ours were always running at a kind of a slow idle, but it was 5 or 6 foot prop blast, so it was huge. And we would hook ourselves into the bottom, and then regarding the diving, it was about 55 feet of water. So we had a compressor down below and a garbage can full of water, and we used to pump the tanks ourselves, fill up the tanks, because we went out and stayed there for 2 weeks at a time. We go to Fort Pierce overnight, go home, come back, buy ship stores, and go back out to the site and stay there for 2 weeks. So we had to continually be filling the tanks. And if you know your dive tables, at 55 feet, you can stay like 55 minutes without going into deco. So, it was a perfect situation. One tank would last just a little less than an hour, and you come back up, and then you do an hour on the surface, and then you could take another tank and go down again. So even though it was technically in about 50 feet of water. We were well within inside the deco tables, and we used to, spend our time shipboard. When you're on a ship, there's constantly work that needs to be done. Something's leaking, something's broke. There's always topside time, and this is kind of an interesting thing. So picture that the ship is at the site, and the way that you would anchor the ship would be one long bow line out front we had, big anchors, and then two stern lines, one off each corner. And my job with my cousin Glenn would be each morning, he and I would load the big anchor into a skiff and run way, way, way out there. And the reason is your anchor lines want to have what's called scope. The further they reach out, the better they'll grab. So, anchor lines that are like this right underneath, they don't have the catch. We would run them in the skiff way out there and put them in, and then run the bow one way out. So now we're triangulated, and that would hold the ship steady. So we would blow a hole and work in it. And then when it came time to move, we would leave the bow line and just release one of the anchor lines and take up on the other anchor line. So what would end up happening is you're sitting like this and you're anchored this way. Well, suddenly this one goes slack and you take up this way. That means the ship wants to swing that way just a little bit. And when you got it moved, when you got it moved, then you tighten down this one. So now they're tight again. After you finish working in that hole, you'd loosen this one, take up a little more, and the ship would move a little more to the side, and then you take up the tension again. And it was a big, I don't know, inch and a quarter nylon rope. I don't know what the breaking strength of the thing was.
A lot, I'm sure.
It was.
Richard, you told me in conversation that one of the items that you found, your crew found, was actually gifted to the Queen of England. Can you tell us a little more about that?
I did. There's a picture of this item floating around on the internet. I don't know. I think there's a company called Sea Treasures might have the picture, but I found a ring myself. I found it at the end of the day. The blowers were turned off. And I used to go back down and collect shells because the bottom was covered with shells. And when I went back down, I found a little ring with 5 emeralds in it, one in the middle, one on each of the corners, and then little gold pieces that stuck out in between. In other words, emerald, 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 and then the gold like this. And the Bahamian government presented that to the Queen of England. I don't know.
Wow.
Know where it's ever gone, and I've never seen it again. But
well, of course, the Queen needed it. She doesn't have enough jewelry, or didn't have enough jewelry.
That's right. Queen never goes anywhere unless somebody else pays.
That's correct. That I can't believe it. We've already been on talking for 50 minutes. It's just a amazing story, and we're only partially into it. How long were you on the wreck salvaging? Has there been recent salvage there? Have they? You mentioned earlier they haven't found the mother lode. That's what I got from that earlier. So, how long were you guys on the wreck? And how long are there still efforts to find the rest of the bounty?
Well, I was there in 74 and 75. My dad was there in 75 and left at the end of the dive season. My dad and my cousin Glenn were there in 75. And then my cousin Glenn got killed in a plane crash. My dad went back to work. He got killed in a plane crash in Jamaica. And my dad went back to work for the National Park Service. And kind of an interesting, if you don't mind me diverting just a little bit, the guy that had the money, Jack Kelly, probably better to say the financier of the operation, realized that it's very expensive to foot the bill for a treasure hunting operation all the time. Mel Fisher was very, very, very skilled at that. So after 2 years of it, Jack had realized that this was a very hard way to make any money. And so he founded the Institute of Nautical Archaeology at the University of Texas. And he recruited George Bass from the Smithsonian to come give the operation some credibility. And then he could donate the money to them and go diving with them. And they went to the Mediterranean and they dove on some of those, Byzantine shipwrecks that, went down BC and, all of that stuff. So he was done with the treasure hunting. And in 76, Glenn got killed. My dad went back to work in the Park Service and I moved away from Miami. And I don't know what happened until Herbo Humphreys got involved. He owned the Holiday Inn in the Cayman Islands. And he brought a couple of guys from there, Dewey Engstrom and another dive master from there. They came up and his operation was called Maravillas. And they have some YouTube videos. You can see some of the footage. It's kind of grainy, but Jack had actually had a documentary made about our efforts and had it narrated by Rod Serling of The Twilight Zone. And I only had one copy of it. And there was a mix-up down at a party on the Keys, and it got lost. But anyway, Herbo Humphreys came up there in the 80s on the Merex, and they got quite a bit of treasure. Again, in the 80s, I wasn't living here. I didn't follow it very closely, but that happened. And then in the 90s, they called him Herbo. He's dead now. In the 90s, I think there were some other people there, and these pictures on the internet are by a company that says Sea Treasures, so I don't know exactly who they are, but in any event, to fast forward to today, Carl Allen, who is the owner of Walker's Cay, and is somehow involved with the Walgreen family fortune, has the rights to work on the Maravilla as well as other shipwrecks. And he's got himself ensconced really well with the Bahamian government by promising to use native peoples. And he built the Bahamas Maritime Museum on Grand Bahama Island. And they've recovered a lot of treasure from the Maravilla. And it's in there, as well as other stuff from other shipwrecks in the Bahamas as well. So that's what's going on. And to the best of my knowledge, Carl still has the rights to.
Okay.
But I do have to say this, as in all shipwrecks, there's a saying, failure is an orphan, but success has many fathers.
Yeah.
And it's that way with shipwrecks. I know of 2 or 3 other people who claim to have the rights to the Maravilla. And, you get into this for shipwreck and Atocha and, all of there's always claims about who owns it. So all I know is that Carl Allen is in good with the Bahamian government and has been very supportive of their culture and their peoples, and provided a lot of work and opportunity. All the restoration of Walker's Cay was all done with native or local, I shouldn't say native, but local Bahamian architects and carpenters, and all that stuff. So, to the best of my knowledge, it's called Allen X Exploration, and they have Maravilla coins for sale on eBay.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Richard, because over the last, I would say, definitely the last 5 years, since I've always loved shipwreck coins. I have a Atocha on right now, a piece of 8. I have some of the gold escudos from different wrecks, and it is even the ones that you brought in that we got traded. The values have increased so much over the last few years. It's especially when you get into the gold escudos. So, for those that don't know, with Spanish coins, you have their denominational. The U.S. took a lot from that structure. The U.S. used to use a lot of the Spanish coins back, pre-colonial days for commerce. But you have a half real, a real, 2 real, 2 real, 4 real, 8 real, and then you have with escudos, you have a 1 escudo. I don't think I've ever seen a half escudo. 1, 2, 4, and an 8. So a 1 escudo it was a small gold coin. It's basically the value of 8 of these back then. But yeah, the values have increased dramatically, and some of these coins that are coming up, that are still coming up, are just so beautiful, so pristine, and the amount of people that want to have a piece of history like this. When I wear it, I feel something from this. I know it sounds silly, but I feel an attachment to this because of the history, because of where it came from. I love history, so to me, this is the direct link to the past. And so, for those that are listening that would like to own a genuine art from the past, reach out to us. We have all kinds of different coins available from various shipwrecks, and we'd love to, if nothing else, just give you some information on some of those coins, because I personally, in my opinion, I don't see a slowdown in the appreciation of these coins. And the reason being is they're very historical. Pirates of the Caribbean might, even though it sounds goofy, that series might have had some of the influence in the valuations going up. So yeah, it's there's a very finite amount of these pieces. They're very hard to get, as Richard is telling us. There's tremendous effort that goes into finding shipwreck coins, shipwreck artifacts, and treasure. And I don't know the percentage of people or organizations that try to find wrecks and fail and spend millions of dollars. So, yeah, it's a really, really really interesting niche in the collectible market. If you like history, if you like items of high tangible value, shipwreck coins, I think are for you. So you should definitely reach out so you can get some additional information. And I mean, we're approaching an hour here, and I can't believe how fast it went by. We might have some questions from our guests if you want to look at that, Dustin.
Yeah. For anyone that's listening, our information is below. Check it out. Our phone number, email us, coins, Gmail, Coin and Currency Net, and you find us on eBay, American Coin and Currency. We have some really good ratings and constantly changing our inventory. So, while supplies last, but get a hold of us if you're looking for anything specific. And yeah, we'll go through the questions. We got about 4 questions here. It looks like. Let's see.
Say this, Dustin.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Richard. You're pulling up a book, Richard. Let's see what you got.
Yeah, let's check it out.
Okay, so this is the definitive book on the Maravilla, and this is really the story of the priest that survived all 3 of the 2 shipwrecks and so on. It's written by Dave Horner. If you really want to know, this happens to be an autographed copy, but I bought it on eBay. This is the definitive story of the Maravilla, and then this is Bob Mark's book on his effort. In fact, on the back, I don't know if you can see it. There's the ring.
Oh, cool.
There's the ring. This is Bob. This is Dick Anderson. I told you he came with his Aussie hat on. This is what it looked like on the bottom. And of course, I'm mentioned in this book. It's called Quest for Treasure.
Thank you.
There you go. I'm sorry. Now let's go to the questions.
Oh, for sure. Thanks for sharing. Are there still legal or ownership disputes surrounding treasures, and who has the rights to it?
Well, that's what I said to you before. Failure is an orphan, but success has many fathers. And, there's always controversy. The situation with Mel Fisher was the state said, that's our wreck. And he said, no, it's in international waters. And the U.S. government said, oh, that's great. If it's in international waters, that's ours. And so that's always the case. As far as I know, even though I've met people that claim they have the rights to the wreck, to the best of my knowledge, Carl Allen and Allen X have the legal rights with the Bahamian government to salvage the Maravilla and the rest of the shipwrecks in the Bahama waters.
That makes sense. Yeah, I hope to answer your question. Let's see. Let's go next here. How can someone discover a shipwreck, and what are some techniques you can share finding some?
Well, it's a very, very expensive and arduous job finding a shipwreck. Let me tell you. I mean, it's tons and tons of work and could be hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. The best thing that I would recommend that you do is there's a group that still works the 1715 fleet, which is right off the coast of Florida. I mean, right off the coast. You could practically swim to shore. And the biggest there's a group called Queen's Jewels that own all of the legal rights to it, but there are companies that have the right to work under their license. You can go on Facebook and look them up. Bill Black has a group called Search and Salvage, and they have a boat called the Showdown out there working. And there's a half a dozen boats that work along there, and they're always looking for investors because that's what greases the wheels and keeps the thing going forward. So it's really very, very difficult to find a shipwreck. I would say contact one of those companies, invest whatever it takes. You may not get anything out of it, but you can write a check, and tomorrow morning you can be on the ship to see what it's really all about. And they may find something. The 1715 fleet, Mel Fisher found 1,000 gold coins one day. So, I mean, it could happen. And there's still like half a dozen ships that haven't been found. So the potential is really there.
Yep.
All right. Well, good question, NFTZoo. We'll get on to the next question here. Have you been a part of other shipwrecks?
Well, I dove one day on the 1715 fleet with a guy named Bob Weller, who's very well known. And I dove on the 1733 fleet off Elliott Key with my dad a lot, particularly the wreck of the El Capulo. But the 1733 fleet is sprinkled along the upper keys. 1715 is up along the shore. To be quite honest with you, it's a ton of work, even for a young guy. I had to get in the water at the crack of dawn every morning and put over anchors and tie the blower down and all that. And I mean, it gets to be so much work that I gave it up and said, I'll find something that's a little easier to do.
And for those that don't know, doing work on a boat is twice as hard as doing work on land. Especially if there's a little roll, you're constantly having to stabilize your body.
Never stop.
It is a ton of work. Richard, you can't be more right about that.
All right, thanks, LF Grow. Appreciate the question. We've got one more question. Let's see. What are some of the most fascinating or rare items recovered from a wreck so far?
Well, the best thing would be there was a lot of gold, more ornate gold than gold coins. This picture, well, I think John had a better example of it. I mean, you can see this gold that I'm holding right here, and that ring that I just showed you. It's on the back of this book. I mean, this is an incredible. There you go. I mean, that's an incredible thing. Here's Dick Anderson with the chains of gold. So the stuff is so scattered out. There weren't a lot of other, no astrolabes and maybe a spoon here or there. We did find a little piece of a chessboard or checkers board or something like that, but they're just really, it was so scattered. We just didn't find a lot of artifacts.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, a lot of fascinating items you found. So, glad that you.
I have a quick question, Richard. Did the gentleman, I forgot his name, he was the first investor who owned who built all the buildings? Do you know if he recouped his investment?
I really seriously doubt that. Although I can after I left, my dad and he tried to find the best way to sell this stuff. John, you'll get a kick out of this. When this was going on, it was big news in the skin diving world, and a lot of magazines came out with articles on us. So as I would find the magazines on the magazine rack, I would buy them and bring them home, put them in sleeves. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I eventually turned them all over to the Bahamas Maritime Museum. But in the back were ads for the coins, and they were the coins. The coins were selling for, a good coin was $100, and you could
Wow.
buy all you want.
Jeez.
A little
Holy
class
moly.
in the magazine, Spanish coins for sale. So I'm certain there's no way that you could have recovered, all of the money. That's the thing about, treasure hunting. It's a bottomless pit of expenses.
Yep. Makes sense. There's very few treasure hunters recoup their investments. Fisher is one of the few, very well known, but there's not too many others. I did have another question, Richard, because we're going to be wrapping this up in a minute, and we'd love to have you back because I think there's more to discuss here. We kind of went over broad strokes, which I greatly appreciate you coming in and doing that with us. But do you have anyone in the area you can recommend to come on the show and have further discussions about this topic?
You might be able to get a guy named Trip Wagner. He knows a lot about the coins, and he has some artifacts from it. He wasn't a diver, but he deals a lot in the coins, and
Yep.
He might be a good source. The other thing, John, I wish I could, but at my age, what happens to old guys? they just pass on. So I'm the only one of only two people left. There just aren't that many.
Really? You're one of only two left from the original crew?
From the original crew.
Wow. Okay.
You
You must not have touched the cursed Spanish gold.
And the other guy is you mentioned Dominic Adario, but his partner was Peter Leo, and he lived in Tequesta. And
Yeah, I know him.
Oh yeah, he'd be a good source, and he's a great raconteur, far better than me. He tells a good story.
Great. Wonderful. I learned a tremendous amount today. Things I didn't know, so I greatly appreciate you coming on our show and telling us about your story. And we'd love to have you back on because I there's a lot. I think we can really get granular with some of these things. But what a fascinating story that is, and yeah, I mean I was thinking about this before we started the show. How few people in the world that have lived have had your experience of doing what you've done. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. It it's all a result of my dad, but he and I were best buddies, and we did all this stuff together.
Wow, that's great.
Thank you for having me on. It's been very nice to talk about it. You caused me to dig out and dust off some stuff, and rack the old brain for some of the things that might have been lost in the dustbin of history. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. All right, a couple things here before we wrap up. Just remind everybody to check out our eBay. We have all our inventory there as well. I'm going to show you guys here on screen. Check us out on eBay. Also, if you guys want to leave a review, for those who have purchased items, you can go on our Google review here. Got some good reviews, but always encouraging more reviews. Final words from you guys. You guys have any parting words you would like to share with our community?
I'd just like to say, keep tuning in. We're gonna have more interesting shows. So We'd like to keep our audience engaged and educated. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. Yeah. Richard, any final words?
Well, in Mel Fisher's words, today's the day. He kept people going.
Today's the day.
He kept people going for 16 years with nothing to show for it by just saying, "All right, today's the day." So,
I love that. All right. Yeah, good. Yeah, it's been a good episode, a good show, stream. I want to give a little shout out to people, Silver Crusader for reposting the stream. We have Matt Towns. They said great discussion. He did have a final question. I didn't see this. What are some of the larger gemstone sizes?
Matt, I don't know anything about how things are rated. It was kind of a joke that I couldn't see anything green. My dad was picking them up as fast as he could, but I don't know anything about. I guess the best thing to do would be to look up meso emeralds, and you can probably find out more about them. But I really don't know the answer to that question.
Well, thanks for the question, Matt. Thanks for everyone being here. It's American Coin and Currency. We have these live streams 1 p.m. Eastern every week on Thursdays. Special guest Richard Seitz. Appreciate you being here. Of course, my co-host John Mady, CEO, founder of American Coin and Currency, and I'm Dustin Lee, here as head of social media. And remind you to stay sharp, stay curious, and keep collecting smart. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you. You guys have a great day.
Thank you, Richard.
Welcome.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate you.